Okay, so we are now live streaming to the YouTube channel. And I got a couple more people to let in. Okay, Tom and Tom, I'm going to sort of disappear now. It's your meeting.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Joe. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Stanley, City Councilor at Large and Chair of the Ad Hoc Committee on Housing, Waltham City Council. At this time, I'm going to open up the meeting and ask the clerk to call the roll.
Okay. Councilor Paz. Councilor Vidal. Diana Gear. Daria Gear, I'm sorry. James Lacrosse.
He's here, but he's
James
muted. He's
Okay, I
muted.
see one. Robert Waters.
Present.
Diana Young.
Present.
Chairman Stanley.
Present.
Okay, for Conifer, we have a quorum, Mr. Chairman.
All right, great. Well, tonight we have a special guest, Chris Norris. He's the Executive Director of the Metropolitan Housing, Boston Housing Partnership. And he's been serving in that, was formerly the Metropolitan Boston Housing Partnership and now Metro Housing Boston. And he's been serving in this capacity since 2007. I've known him for a long time, relied on his expertise in the housing area for a great number of years with regards to passing legislation and also budgetary items. Chris oversees a staff of 160. Metro Housing connects residents of Greater Boston with safe, decent homes they can afford and administers more than 10,000 rental assistance vouchers. During the last 13 years, Chris has expanded the organization's portfolio, taking on individuals to move along the continuum from homelessness to housing stability. Under his leadership, Metro Housing has established partnerships to collaborate on innovative solutions to the region's housing challenges, including working with organizations such as Boston Medical Center, Children's Hospital, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts, and 3 affordable care organizations, recognizing housing as a social detriment of health. Norris's team provided assistance to families living in motels using the federal homelessness prevention and rapid rehousing program, the forerunner of the state-funded home-based program, which Metro continues to administer regionally. He has also prioritized accessibility, bringing services out into the community, now in 9 municipalities with 17 organizations, and increasing the organization's capacity to provide an in-house language assistance. The housing nonprofit is widely recognized as a leader in navigating the affordable housing field. Prior to working at Metro Housing, Chris spent 10 years as the Assistant Director of Citizens Housing and Planning Association, which is known as CHAPA, in which he directed their legislative policy work. Before that, he served as a coordinator for the National Consumer Law Center's foreclosure prevention program. He also worked for the Boston City Council and the Massachusetts House of Representatives. He received his Bachelor of Art degree from the University of the Pacific in 1988, his Juris Doctorate from the Massachusetts School of Law in 1991, and is admitted to the Massachusetts Bar. He serves on the board of directors of CHAPA, the Massachusetts Community Banking Council, and the Regional Housing Network of Massachusetts. He also serves on the Boston Continuum of Care Leadership Council, and in 2014 was a member of the Community Committee on Governor Charles Baker's transition team. So you can see why I wanted to have Chris in to speak with us. But before I do that, Member Diana Young moves that we accept the minutes from the previous meeting. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, the ayes have it. All right, Mr. Magno, do we have anyone else that has joined us that we need to take attendance?
Counselor Vidal,
Present.
Daria Gear? No, okay. I thought I missed
Yeah,
her.
Daria's here. I can see her.
Okay, that's what I thought. Is she muted?
Daria, can you hear us?
Doesn't seem to be.
Okay, well, I see her there. We'll mark her as present.
All right. All right. Well, without further ado, I want to invite Chris Norris to speak to all of us. He has a wealth of knowledge in housing in the state of Massachusetts, and I thought he'd be a great resource for us to give us some good background on all the programs that are available, and also just insight on what's happening. So Chris, without further ado, welcome to the Housing Committee of the Waltham City Council.
Sure. Thank you very much, Chairman Stanley. And I'm not sure I can do justice to the introduction you gave me, but I appreciate it. I also want to thank all of the members for having me this evening, and want to especially acknowledge Daria, the executive director at Watch, an organization that Metro has had the privilege to partner with for a number of years. Metro Housing Boston, just by way of background, is the largest regional provider of rental assistance in the Commonwealth. As Chairman Stanley said, we serve about 10,000 households with rental assistance using both state and federal vouchers. And on the other side, in terms of services, we administer the Housing Consumer Education Center for the region, as well as the Residential Assistance for Families in Transition, the RAFT program that I'll talk some about tonight, and other programs to prevent people in crisis from being evicted. Our service area includes Waltham, obviously, as well as 32 other municipalities, primarily inside and bordering Route 128. I think we can still call it Route 128. That just shows my age. And there are many different issues, obviously, that we could discuss regarding housing. You know, we could talk about the lack of housing that's affordable to families who have extremely low incomes. We could talk about equity and what types of housing get built and where they get built and who has access to them. We can talk about housing as a social determinant of health, something that we have had to acknowledge in such a dramatic fashion over the last 6 months. And I'm sure each of you here tonight could come up with your own half dozen or more topics that don't necessarily overlap that we could spend time talking about. But we're faced with the potential end of the Massachusetts eviction and foreclosure moratorium in less than 3 weeks. And the courts themselves estimate that we could see anywhere between 20,000 and 60,000 eviction cases filed statewide in the not too distant future. So I'd like to spend my time this evening talking briefly about the resources that Metro has available to keep people stably housed. And I'm more than happy to answer your questions that you have, because I want to make sure this is useful to you. So feel free to interrupt me, ask me questions as I go. We'll also have time when I finish this for plenty of discussion. But again, I don't want to go off in one direction if you want me to go another. So feel free to pull me in and ask those questions. As I mentioned a couple minutes ago, the primary tool that we're using to keep people housed is RAFT, the Residential Assistance for Families in Transition. And Chairman Stanley knows well about this program. It was established in 2004. It's a state-funded program that provides households with up to $4,000. And as of last Friday, Metro Housing had spent 3.1 million, exhausting our entire annual allocation of RAFT in the first 3 months of the fiscal year. Luckily, the state stepped forward with an additional $6 million on Wednesday last week, so we haven't missed a beat. We're continuing to process applications, and the good folks at Watch are working closely with us to serve as many people as possible in Waltham. To date, we've approved 33 applications totaling $100,000 in Waltham, and we have another 120 that have started the process but haven't completed it. Just by way of comparison, last year, in the entire year, we served 35 households in Waltham. So we've seen a dramatic increase in terms of demand, not just throughout our region, but in Waltham specifically. And as far as demand, we have expressions of interest or partial applications from about 2,000 households that are lined up and waiting for us to have the capacity to get to them. It's taking longer than usual because it was only last week when we were told that we would have an administrative fee to actually begin ramping up staff beyond what we had had in the prior year. So we are doing that. We are continuing to advertise because we know that awareness is key. And earlier today, I sent Tom a copy of our public service announcement for RAFT because we want to be able to reach as many people as possible. I'm happy to put that out in the chat box later if that would be helpful to you. Additionally, yeah. Tom?
I just said, please do. When,
oh, okay, sure,
yeah.
Happy to do that. Additionally, with CARES Act funds and Community Development Block Grant funds and Community Preservation Act funds, there are local municipalities that have created their own emergency rental assistance program. And in fact, I think Waltham is in your third round, if I'm not mistaken, of rental assistance. So folks have really stepped forward. Unfortunately, the rules vary and there are different administrators. And so there's no consistency across the state, which I know makes it frustrating for households as they're trying to navigate that, but at least folks are stepping forward. Citizens Housing and Planning Association with the Massachusetts Housing Partnership earlier this summer released a survey of local governments that were offering this type of assistance. And I can also include that link for you. But there were, if I'm not mistaken, I think there were 48 or so communities across the Commonwealth as of June that had already implemented their own programs. And I know more are coming up. Just in our region, we're administering programs for Revere, Milton, and Braintree that have all happened since that time that have stepped up and are making that work. Unfortunately, there's a few things that we know. One of these is that the emergency programs are Band-Aids that will hopefully solve the short-term emergency for many people. But two, there's not enough funding to serve everyone, especially if the projections that are out there come true. And three, that we need long-term answers such as permanent rental assistance and the production of housing that serves those most in need. About 1.5 years ago, the Federal Reserve of Boston released a report that found that we had one available and accessible apartment for extremely low-income households for every 2 such households. And just to put some numbers with that, extremely low income in our region is approximately $30,000 annually for a family of 3. But I want to really make it clear that the families that Metro works with have average incomes of $15,000 annually for a family of 3. And the families that are moving out of homelessness, that are in shelters and are working with us to move into permanent housing, have average incomes of $9,000 a year annually, not monthly, not quarterly, annually. So you can start to see what the issues are. There are many different options that are out there. Like I said, I know Waltham has stepped up with the Rental Assistance Fund and Community Preservation Act money. I know that Chairman Stanley is co-sponsor of the Housing Stability Bill that's now pending at the State House. Most likely, we don't all agree on what should be done. But what I hope is through this conversation and others is that we all agree that something must be done. I'm going to wrap up so that we can get to this discussion, but if I can leave you with one idea, it would be that when the discussions turns to affordable housing, that each of us be very clear in terms of affordable to whom. Because, you know, Tom Brady put his mansion on the market earlier this year, and I want to say it was on for about $39 million. I think he reduced it to 34 million, and that's affordable to someone. Not affordable to me, maybe not affordable to all of you, but it's affordable to someone. So when affordable housing means nothing if we don't answer the second question, which is affordable to whom. And so I would encourage you when we have those discussions, or when you have those discussions, to actually talk about that. And the other is to be clear that below market housing is extremely important, but it's not the same necessarily as subsidized housing or public housing. And as we've seen, density isn't the same as overcrowding. And that's become extremely important when we look at communities like Chelsea or other communities that have seen huge impacts in terms of COVID, but they haven't seen that follow through in terms of the affordable housing that's available. Just like there have been communities, obviously nursing homes have been hugely impacted by COVID. And we, more than 60% of the deaths, if I'm not mistaken, in Massachusetts have been in nursing homes. But we haven't seen the same in public housing or in subsidized housing for elders, regardless of the density. That's the housing, ironically, that folks have been the most safe in, not just health-wise, but in terms of insulated from losing their housing, because those that have subsidies or who live in public housing where the rent is determined based on their income are able to have that rent adjusted when they lose their jobs. Those are the folks that are going to be stable for the long term, ironically. And so thank you again for this opportunity, and I look forward to our conversation.
Great, thank you, Chris. Appreciate that. Any members have any questions for Chris at this point? I'd like to,
Well-
Diana, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to get a sense of when you're looking at housing for permanent housing, what's the best solutions that you're trying to work? What?
I think that varies. For extremely low income households that we serve, the usual answer and pretty much the only answer is public housing or subsidized housing. Because tax credits, while they are the primary way that we are creating housing, I think across not just the Commonwealth, but the United States in terms of affordable, in quotes, housing, that doesn't reach the lowest income households. So it really is back to the question of who you want to serve. And there are different tools, Daria knows these well, others know these well in terms of when it comes to development, that depending on who you want to serve will lead you to the resources that are or are not available.
Well, so with extremely low incomes, Section 8, does that adjust? Is that one of the, or something, a state program that provides a similar benefit?
Yes, Section 8 is the federal voucher. It adjusts based on income. The state is one of the few states, or Massachusetts is one of the few states that also has a state rental assistance program called the Massachusetts Rental Voucher Program. And then we have a variety of others. Department of Mental Health and Mental Retardation have some programs that include vouchers. There are some specific vouchers set aside for elders and for individuals. But yes, we have state vouchers and federal vouchers where the rent is determined based on the person's income.
Okay, thanks.
Chris, based on what you know about how many people are in need of housing, and I figure, could you repeat the number of folks in Waltham that your agency is providing assistance to? And you said that that went up a great deal from the years past.
Sure. In Waltham, so far this year, we have approved 33 raft applications totaling approximately $100,000. And we have another 120 residents that have started the application process but haven't completed it yet. And last year, so that would bring us to if we added everything and just kept with the 33, we would have more than 150 or so. Last year, we served 35 in total over 12 months.
Okay. Are there other agencies that provide that same service in Waltham, or is it just your agency that has that area under your jurisdiction? Or?
Sure, it is just Metro Housing that administers the RAFT program in Waltham. However, like I said, we're working closely with Watch to reach out to residents and to, they're doing a lot of the hand holding that we don't have the capacity to do. RAFT was, it's sort of back to the Band-Aid that I mentioned. You may recall, I think it was your second term in 2004 when we were working on this. I was at CHAPA, and RAFT was never set up to do what it's doing now. RAFT was set up to fill a small gap for folks who had a slight interruption in their income for a very short term, and that for whom $4,000 would make it $3,000 at the time, but now for whom $4,000 would make a difference. That's not what we're facing now. So we're doing the best we can with a resource, and luckily the legislature has stepped forward with additional funding. The legislature has also passed, as part of a supplemental budget, allowing for the Department of Housing and Community Development to go up to $10,000 per household. Unfortunately, they have not implemented that. They are still sticking with the $4,000, which is unfortunate because as this goes on, we're watching people come in with more and more arrears. The arrearages are growing, not shrinking, particularly now that the additional unemployment $600 a week has ended. That was helping people pay their bills, and that was keeping people housed. Counselor, I'm sorry, I don't know, Diana asked about resources. One of the best resources we have is providing people with the money they need to pay their rent, regardless of what we build or what we develop or anything else. And unfortunately, with that stopping, what we fear is that folks are just going to fall further and further behind, and $4,000 isn't going to make a difference because and landlords are in the same situation. We work closely, landlords, small owners in particular, provide the majority of affordable housing in the Commonwealth. And by affordable, I mean across the board. They provide the majority of the housing that has voucher holders. They provide a majority of the naturally occurring, in quotes, affordable housing. Those are small owners. And if those owners aren't getting paid, I've seen some reports where we run the risk of them losing their housing and having that gobbled up. And if someone purchases that housing at the height of the market at today's prices, we're going to lose that housing in addition to losing the subsidized or the other housing that we have out there that runs the risk of expiring use and going market rate and things like that.
So is it fair to say that any assistance right now, the priority is temporary assistance, if you will, for lack of a better term, just keeping people in rental units as opposed to providing, permanent housing, and because you can help so many more people? Is that accurate?
I think it's both. I mean, right now we have the Band-Aid that I referred to, and it makes a difference for families that we can keep stably housed with $4,000. And in normal times, we were able to show that did keep people stable for a year. And it was for $4,000, that's just slightly more than the monthly cost of keeping a family in shelter. And last time I looked, the average length of stay in shelter in our region was a year. So $4,000 is short money to keep people in their current housing, regardless of whether you worry about the disruptions or everything else to the household that are important to look at. But production is the real answer. In the long term, we have to have additional housing. If household sizes are going to continue to shrink or have shrunk from where they used to be, and if folks are going to ask for larger houses, we need more housing, and particularly at the lowest income levels. If the committee would let me share my screen, I don't know if I can, but I can try. I'm going to pull up a slide. Let me see if it'll let me. Nope, it's disabled it. Sorry. There's a slide that the Mass Housing Partnership prepared maybe a year or two ago. And what that slide showed was, if you look at extremely low income households, those who are making less than 30% of the area median that I talked about, 30,000 for a family of 3, and you add in as well the very low income households, that's more than 500,000 households across the Commonwealth who are rent burdened. Those two categories are more than all of the other categories combined. And yet when you look at our production programs, the groups that we're building housing for are all of those other groups. And that's not the fault of the developers. Daria can explain well, Joanne can explain well why it is that developers can't build for the lowest income households, because they can't afford to do it and to maintain the property. I mean, the income that's coming in isn't enough to even maintain the property, let alone build it. And so we need both. We need the short-term subsidies to keep people going. We need vouchers and public housing for the lowest income households who aren't going to get served anywhere else. And then we need a production program as well, just to increase the stock of housing so that people can have access, and to hopefully, moderate. I'm not under any illusion that we're going to drive down prices in Greater Boston, at least not during the 30 years I've been here. But at a minimum, if we could hold steady and make sure people have a safe place to live, we'll have taken a step in the right direction.
So along those lines of providing permanent housing, two kind of areas I'd like you to speak on, if you're familiar with. One is utilizing CPA funding, like what have other communities done that perhaps hasn't been tried here in Waltham to help create affordable housing. Is that possible, or is there real big challenges that prevent communities from achieving that? And then also, I talked a little bit with you over the phone today about there's a proposal before the city council, and it's not before our committee, but just to help us get a better understanding. It's before the Ordinance and Rules Committee, I believe. In Waltham, in the last year or two, we went from 10% to 15% for the required set aside for affordable housing with special permits for developments over a certain size. And so this latest proposal is to go to 20%. And for many people, including myself, it's just the unknown of what would that cause developers to do. Would it cause, and there's an argument whether, we need more 40Bs or not, but I think most of us are elected officials, or to speak for myself, very cautious about 40Bs because of the size and the traffic that comes with it. But if you can just speak a little bit about what your knowledge or experience is in whether going to 20% for special permits would be, what effect would that have in a community like Waltham? And I believe Cambridge and Somerville have already done this, but as we talked on the phone, I also think that they did some extensive research and gathering information to have a better idea what the effect would be. But
Sure. I'm going to start that one with a caveat, which is I have been out of the development side for many years and have had the luxury of focusing on the families and households that we work with. So I can give you my 2 cents and my thoughts based on what I've seen and just what I think is out there. The first piece is that every little bit helps. So to the extent a community has community support and can increase the stock of housing that is below market, I think that's a step. I think that's great and a step in the right direction, especially that you have many communities that don't even want to broach the subject or talk about it, as we've seen in Color of Law and some of the other books that are out there, if not our own experience. As far as how far to go, I think that depends on the communities. I mean, obviously, I assume some of you are lawyers out there. At some point, we're going to kill the golden goose to the extent we rely on developers to private developers to step forward and provide this housing for us, because at some point, someone's going to say, this is a taking, and I'm not allowed to make the profit that I'm otherwise entitled to make. And what you're giving me, in quotes, in exchange for it, isn't enough. And so I think, though, that's a discussion internally with the folks in town, the developers, and the residents to try and broker that and make the determination where you strike a balance between what they're able to provide, what they're willing to provide, and what you need. And I think that also then comes full circle, though, back to my earlier statement about who do you want to serve? Because I don't know, I haven't looked at Walthams, but most of these developments and the affordable units are for households at 80% of area median income. And I know there's a development in the north end of Boston that goes up to 120% of area median income. And that's great, for those households who can't otherwise afford to live there. But if you're trying to serve families who really have no other recourse, that's not going to get you there. And so I think the discussion really needs to be broadened to who do we want to serve and how. Even in my own neighborhood in Boston, I ran into this where there was a nonprofit developer that took over for a for-profit developer who couldn't make a deal work. They got all of the necessary funding. They wanted to make it family housing. They wanted to make it affordable at 80% of area median income, and the neighbors objected to it. And they were really clear, the neighbors, about why they objected to it. And the quote from the floor of that meeting was, "We don't want our neighborhood to look like Dorchester." Leave aside all of the fair housing implications and everything else that says, but it is a real issue. And that was serving, the top of the quote, low income households. That never even got to serving the folks who have no other options. So every little bit helps. But if you're looking to go lower than 80%, I think you need additional tools, and you can't just rely, I'm biased, I fully admit it, even on TV, I'll admit it, which is, government has a role to play in this from my perspective. If you want deeply affordable housing where income is set, where rent is set based on income, either the federal government or the Commonwealth need to step up and fund it and pay for it. And you can't rely on the private market to do it, because the private market has to make a profit.
Well, I think that's exactly the point. All the cases that come before the city council looking for a special permit, they're all private developers. I mean, I don't remember, Watch was probably the last one, and I forget if it even reached the council floor, but the last nonprofit that came in. So it's.
Well, that's not entirely true.
All right, go ahead.
Metro West came in to the CPC with a proposal, but we couldn't get it we needed to really discuss it with the law department to get it to work. But it was a proposal that was hoping to get to the point where there'd be both federal and state affordable housing tax credits, where they could sell those credits in effect to an investor. That was really, I was wondering from the perspective of trying to get real production. When it comes to affordable housing for people in the 50% of area median income and lower, who can provide that? Is it really going to be the for-profit developers, or is it going to be the community development corporations, or is it going to be somebody else?
I think, yeah, I'd ask Daria to weigh in on it because she has the experience. I think it's going to be whoever you give the subsidies to. For-profit, there are really good for-profit developers that will do this if the subsidy is attached to it. But primarily, I think you're going to see it in nonprofits. And if we had a true public housing development going on, we would see it there because that's who was actually charged with doing it before we stopped building that housing.
From the state perspective, you mean from?
State or federal. I mean,
Okay,
Massachusetts is one of only a couple of states that have state public housing, but we're not building state or federal public housing right now.
Right, okay. And I do remember that, Diana, now that I don't think did that reach the council? I don't think it reached the
No, it did
council.
not. It got stuck in the law department.
And they were looking for like,
What they were
maybe
looking
close to
for,
100% affordable?
it was all going to be affordable, and I don't think we got to the terms as to how much was going to be at what levels of affordability. But what the need was, we just needed a commitment that the CPC would provide money so that buildings could be bought. And without some kind of commitment, we couldn't get the credit facility for Metro West. But the law department said unless they knew what the buildings were, they couldn't do it. Even though we would have to come back, we wouldn't have actually put out the money till they came back with an affordable housing restriction on the property. So there would be no payout until that point.
Right, it's no easy task, I understand. There's a lot of
Well, that's
political,
why I think
it has to be managed properly and people to understand
yeah.
what the proposal is and what it isn't as
Yeah.
well before it can be successful.
I think it would be useful for this committee to have somebody like Michelle Lerner come in, somebody who really understands real estate, to see what's possible, to help talk through where there are options that we could come up with as a city, even though the amount of CPA money now is diminished.
Right. Okay. Any other members want to direct any questions to Mr. Norris? This time, no?
Oh,
Go ahead, Daria.
Chris, I know you're sort of a large regional agency. How would you say Waltham is comparing with other towns in your catchment area in terms of accessing raft? Are we, sort of on par with what other communities are doing, or
Sure. I think everyone's trying, Waltham, I mean, the fact that you have a committee, the fact that you're talking about it, the fact that you set aside CPA dollars for it, makes a difference. It really does. I mean, there are communities that don't talk about it at all. Now, at least for us in Metro Boston, I think we're relatively lucky in the sense that we do have a commitment. If you start to look at the communities that are, I would just say in quotes, doing their part, but are stepping forward, many of them are in this region. I mean, if you look at Boston and Somerville and Cambridge and, even Waltham, and, I know Belmont has done a lot of work recently trying to step forward, but you guys all know, you're at the local level there, that it's pushing and pushing and pushing, and it doesn't get any easier. And someone comes in with a proposal for a family development and it gets beat back by folks that want to know why there are going to be kids and can't we just do it for elders? Or you come in with 3-bedroom units and they want to know why we can't just do 1-bedrooms and studios, which is another way of getting to the same thing. And so I think Waltham is up there. You're doing the work and you're trying to improve it. And the thing is, there's always more that can be done. I'd really like to see personally, and this isn't even Metro, but I come from California originally. I moved out here for law school all those years ago. And we had strong county level government there, we didn't have 351 cities and towns, each with home rule, that each got to decide their own zoning and each got to decide their own pieces. And I think that's part of the challenge that we face in Massachusetts, is not having regional efforts or partnerships across communities that really drive what we want development to look like. And it's challenging if you're being elected every 2 years or even every 4 years to have discussions where, you know, the discussion might go on for 6 years, unfortunately, before anything gets built. So, you know, the fact that you're stepping up as a city and raising it and having the discussions in addition to what you put forward so far, I think is great.
All right, great. Thank you very much. Diana. I can't hear you. We can't hear you. You're muted. Diana?
Mute. There.
All right.
It took a lot of clicks to unmute. I just had a real quick question. If there were a community that we could learn from, is there one or two that you might suggest?
That's a really good question. I'm trying to think of communities that are similar in size to Waltham, because I don't think it's really fair to compare you and budget-wise to others, but, you know, leaving that aside in terms of size, I do think, you know, some of the theories and the programs, you know, I think Boston and Cambridge, and I would say Somerville are all particularly good at dedicating resources and at trying new things and at pushing the envelope. And I think that's what you really need, the political will to push the envelope, even if you don't know what's likely to happen, and being able to rise to that and say, we're going to test it. We're going to try something. It might work, it might not work, but it's better than just doing the same old thing. Their Mass Housing Partnership, Massachusetts Housing Partnership, is a great resource as a whole. They do a lot of work with individual communities, so I would definitely refer you to them. They also have, in addition to the report that I circulated the link to about emergency rental assistance funds, they have their own data gathering program that they have instituted over the last year and a half or so that is huge. And you can click on individual communities and you can see what they're doing and you can see progress. And it's not limited to 40B, it's beyond that and broader than that. So I'd point you to MHP.
Okay, thank you.
Great. All right, if there's no further questions, we do have to get ready to go to us, the city councilors, have to get ready for live in-person city council meetings tonight and get down to Government Center for that. So I want to thank you very much for dropping all this knowledge on us. And I think you gave us some other ideas on things to pursue. And if you don't mind, we may reach out to you if we have other questions along the way.
Chairman Stanley, 1 second.
Yes, who's that?
Tom Agnew.
Oh, yes.
Can I just ask Chris, send me a phone call tomorrow? Chris, you tried to enlarge your screen and share your screen earlier. If you have any information, good information you want to share with the committee, and I'm not asking you to do any homework, just if you have any templates or any data, if you could just email them to me and I'll put them on our website and I'll share them with the committee.
Sure, I can do that. I have some other links for some other recent reports that I can send. And I emailed the slide, the MHP slide in terms of need and demand and cost burden to you, Tom. So you already have that.
Perfect.
I just sent it to you while we were on the call, on the Zoom.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you very much for having me. I'm always happy to do this. You know, I don't get the luxury of actually talking policy as much as I used to because we're busy running programs. So I welcome this opportunity and just thank you for taking an interest like some of us housing nerds do.
All right. Thank you very much.
Have a good night.
You too.
Take care.
Yeah. All right. So I don't think if there's nothing else right now, I think, Tom, do we hear back from anyone else yet about coming in to speak with us?
We did. We have 3 other people that I'm lining up for dates. I already have somebody lined up for our next meeting. I have 2 people willing to do future meetings.
All right, great. So you'll send that information to us. All right, then. So Councilor Vidal moves that we adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, those opposed? All right, very good.
Um,
I'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.